Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to your 2019 Signing Day special. This is the first day of the early signing period for football, but as is the case, most of the recruits did make their signings official on this day. Brent Hubbs, Jesse Simonton, Austin Price, and I'm Mark Packer. Let's start with the overall thoughts. Brent, we'll start with you. Just overall, you have to consider it a good day.
Well, I think so. I mean, Tennessee went into the day with 5 guys that I think were realistic, and they went 5 for 5, which, you know, everybody wants to avoid the bad news or the bad flip, and Tennessee did not have that today. And we'll get specific with those guys, but I think, you know, this is one of the 5 that they got today, and Tyler Barron and Jesse, I think that started. He wasn't the first one, but that was a big one for Tennessee to get done, and it was a good day for Tennessee.
It was, and just on kind of a macro level, the fact that Tennessee was not only able to go 5 for 5, but half the signees today are from the state of Tennessee, Austin. Yeah. That has been a renewed focus for this staff in this 2020 cycle after kind of, you know, shifting elsewhere in the 2019 class, for them to not only get Tyler Barron, but Amari Thomas, Keyshawn Lawrence, Cooper Mays, kind of on down the line, the Memphis trio. They attacked that group, and they landed their lion's share of them.
Well, for me, it's just adding playmakers. You had a playmaker in Marvin Joseph at 4 o'clock today, the cherry on top in the early signing period, an edge pass rusher that can get to the quarterback. You beat out Florida and Florida State for him. You had Jimmy Holliday earlier in the day, who was committed to TCU and is a talented quarterback that they'll likely use kind of the way they did Tim Jordan and Juwan Jennings this past year in a Wildcat formation, except for now you'll have an athletic quarterback and not a receiver or a running back running the Wildcat. So to me, they added playmakers on both sides of the ball today, and I think that's huge.
And I think the overriding other story for me with this class is that the loyalty and the fact that this class stayed together. This is a football program that lost to Georgia State and BYU, and it was not going well. Yes, they got hot at the end, but even through that rough spot, okay, Tennessee's core guys that they had committed, you know, the Cooper Mazes, the Keyshawn Lawrences, the Harrison Baileys, all those guys, they stayed together. That says a lot about what they believe this program has got going and the direction they're going. I think it's also a credit to this coaching staff, because they told them, hey, bumpy road. Now, nobody was predicting a loss to Georgia State, but hey, we're going to get better as the season goes along. So the vision they put out there for those kids, they got to see come to fruition, help this class stay together.
You know, I thought what was interesting is if you're Tennessee and you're trying to make the steps, what are those steps to get where you're trying to go? It's not win a national championship. It's not win an SEC title. It's to win your own division. Okay, you look at the 4- and 5-star guys, according to Rivals.com. Georgia signs 15. Florida signs 14. Tennessee, 13. Tennessee's right in there swinging with the big boys in their own division.
They are, and to get to that point where they're beating Florida and Georgia again, they've got to learn to beat teams like Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Missouri. They were able to do that this year. They've won 6 out of 7. They went 5-3 in conference play, Mark. And I think that goes a long way to finishing out this class the way they did.
Of your teams that you just mentioned in the East, South Carolina signs 4 or 5 stars, Vanderbilt 1, Missouri 0.
Kentucky with a sneaky 8, though. They had a really solid class.
They had a sneaky 8. Okay, let's start talking about one of those guys, Brent, Tyler Barron, a guy right here out of Knoxville, big kid on the defensive end.
Yeah, and I think everybody felt like it was going to be Tennessee in the end. He certainly looked at Kentucky and gave them a long look, visited Oklahoma, visited Ohio State as well. But this is a guy who made the transition from the mid-state to Catholic this year. He's a good athlete. I had a chance to watch him in 7-on-7 work this summer playing tight end. You know, he could play tight end, to be honest with you. He's got that kind of nimbleness about him. I think the big question with Tyler is how big is Tyler going to get, which will determine ultimately down the road what is his final home position, you know, in this defense.
Yeah, I mean, it was noteworthy today that Jeremy Pruitt named Tyler among the outside linebacker groups, called him, you know, a guy that they envisioned standing up in that hybrid 3-4 look. We'll see. I know Tyler wants to play that jack position. I imagine he will start his career at that jack position. But when you look at the guys that Pruitt's coached, we're talking about the Leonard Floyds, the Tim Williamses, the Rashawn Evanses. Those guys were all 235, 245 pounds. Darrell Taylor the same way. I think ultimately a lot of folks think that Tyler's going to be a guy who's going to be an impact defensive end for the Vols. Probably has the neck and the shoulders to get up to close to 275, 285 pounds.
Austin, you and I have talked about recruits over the years so many times, and I always say, who did they pick Tennessee over? Kentucky and Ohio State makes the Barron signing a little bit more impressive.
No doubt about it, especially when we talked about Kentucky a minute ago. You know, they had a really solid class, especially with defensive linemen. When you look at the fact they got Octavius Oxendine, they got Justin Rogers. had a really nice, solid class up front. And Mark Stoops in Kentucky, they've been slowly building that program up there. So to beat out Kentucky for him, Kentucky now isn't what Kentucky used to be. And I know Tennessee fans still think, well, we beat up on them. That's fine. But again, much more formidable now on the recruiting trail than they ever have been before. And then again, Ohio State, Oklahoma, 2 other teams that were heavily involved for Barron as well.
Most of the signings happened earlier in the day, and then Marvin Joseph comes through. And Tennessee fans living on Twitter say if Joseph comes through, you move up the rivals' rankings. Last number I saw was up to 11. This guy kind of moved you up a spot or two.
Yeah, he's up to 9.
Yeah, moved Tennessee up to 9 after his signing. And Jesse, this is an interesting recruitment. He was kind of all over the map, and then Tennessee looked like they were in great shape, and then he takes a surprise visit late, and it got dicey today, but Tennessee in the end won out.
Yeah, and this one's also kind of a meshing of all of Tennessee's recruiting philosophies in one, too. You land a blue chipper, but he's a blue chipper that they had to evaluate in person in camp this summer. They liked what they saw, but then they waited for that senior season, that senior film to really go all in, Austin. And so that's how they're able to kind of basically stay in the weeds, much like some of these Memphis guys. And then you beat out Florida and Florida State for a kid at Lake. I mean, getting a kid out of Lakeland, I mean, that's a Florida pipeline. Now, Florida had a rough day today in that area. A lot of Lakeland kids going elsewhere, Georgia, Oklahoma, Miami. But for Tennessee to get a 4-star impact pass rusher at a position of need, key win for the Vols.
Oh, 100%. And really, you know, when you kind of let Jamari Butler go and you know, he ended up going to Nebraska at Tennessee's urging, you needed to land a guy like Marvin Joseph, and they do that today at the, you know, I won't even say the 11th hour. It's more like the 13th hour for Marvin Joseph.
All right, interesting one today, and I will have to say this one hits close to home for me. I went to TCU. Jimmy Holliday makes the flip from a TCU commitment to a Tennessee signee. This is a guy that's really the opposite of Harrison Bailey at quarterback.
Yeah, just watch the tape. I mean, all you got to do is watch the highlights of this guy and understand why Tennessee and Jim Chaney is in love with him. He's so good with the ball in his hand. You know, how good of a passer he becomes or doesn't become, we'll have to, you know, wait and see. But just dynamic with the ball in his hand. Terrific, at worst case scenario, change of pace guy, but I think a guy who ultimately can be a playmaker for Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean, he's raw, you know, and just his fundamentals and mechanics as a quarterback, but Pruitt was pretty effusive in his praise tonight, talking about Jimmy just in terms of his skill set mirrors a lot of what's going on in the NFL with Lamar Jackson and Deshaun Watson and that stuff. He threw for 1,000 yards as a senior, but just as impressively, Austin, he runs a 4.38 and ran for 1,400 yards and 21 touchdowns. He's a guy who Tennessee sold on. We have a package and envision a plan to use you as a playmaker.
Early.
He'll get a start at quarterback. That's where he's going to start that room, and how that room plays out this spring is going to be fascinating. But he gives Tennessee an interesting dynamic moving forward in 2020 and beyond.
Well, and you know, he ends up flipping to Tennessee. Why? Because Tennessee showed him the plan, as Brent said, of how they would use him early on, a vision for him playing the quarterback position at Tennessee, and they sent a focus of Jim Chaney, Chris Winkie, Will Friend. I mean, basically the whole offensive staff outside of David Johnson and Brian Niedermeyer went to see Jimmy Holliday. That had a huge impact because if you're willing to send your offensive coordinator and your quarterbacks coach to see him, and TCU is sending their wide receivers coach to see you, and you're an athletic quarterback.
Bad move, Horned Frogs.
That's a bad move.
Bad
for your alma mater,
Horned
Packer.
Frogs. Okay, here's what's always interesting to me is when you've got a guy that comes out of a place like Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or Athens, Georgia, and the next kid comes out of Athens, Georgia, to Tennessee. How do you evaluate that based off of Georgia's right there?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting one because Georgia was kind of cooled on Lenneth Whitehead because they had other targets at inside linebacker.
Okay.
They also only had so many spots at that position. You see that a lot with in-state local guys. Those schools have to be particularly selective. But Tennessee got a good one in Lenneth Whitehead. I mean, he is just one of the better, I would say, Hubs, just pure athletes in this 2020 class. He's an Olympian, elite level shot putter. He wants to play running back, which that's going to be interesting. We'll see how that plays out. At minimum, he's going to be a fantastic special teams player for Tennessee. Would not be surprised, AP, if he ends up on defense.
Would not surprise me at all long term, but he's going to get the start at tailback and prove that he can play it. We'll see if he's able to get that done. But again, there have been many of a big tailback that's had success in a Jim Chaney offense or a team coach that had a Jeremy Pruitt, coach team. And there have been many guys at Tennessee that have started out at tailback and moved to linebacker and had quite a bit of success. So, I mean, history is on his side.
Including getting an NFL paycheck.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing. It's what happened with his recruitment. So he wanted to be a linebacker, was good with a linebacker, so everybody kind of recruited him as a linebacker. And then he decided he wanted to be a running back. And then when he decided he wanted to be a running back, there were some teams that were down the road with other tailbacks and like, we're not seeing that. And he lost interest in some of those teams because they wanted him as a linebacker.
Okay.
He wanted the opportunity to play tailback. And Tennessee gave him, said, look, you play wherever you want to play. We need an athlete, like you on our roster. And so that's part of what happened there. South Carolina really didn't recruit him as an offensive player, even though they knew he wanted to play offense. He went to Wisconsin. It was too far away. There was some intrigue with UCLA with the family, but I think other parts of the family said, stay closer to home, and that's why he ended up at Tennessee.
Yeah, the grandmother specifically was big on Tennessee and wanted him to go to Knoxville, and that's a big reason why Leonard Whitehead chose Tennessee earlier today. But you're right, he was intrigued by UCLA, and another coaching snafu. He takes a late trip and late in the season to South Carolina. Mark, only defensive coaches talked to Leonard Whitehead. Everybody knew he wanted to play tailback. I mean,
bad move.
Yeah, I mean, why not at least go through the motions? Even if you think, hey, we're going to move him to linebacker, why would only the defensive staff talk to him? That's a dead giveaway.
In a related note, Will Muschamp fired 2 of these offensive coaches.
if we're learning anything, the coaching staff has to know what the kid wants before they bring the kid in to talk to him.
Well, I think the thing, and we'll talk about this throughout the remainder of the show here as we break down kids, you got to know what the kid wants.
Correct.
Where he wants to play.
Yeah.
You also got to know who the decision makers are. Okay. With Marvin Joseph, Marvin's uncle, who's got guardianship with him, and it's an aunt and an uncle that have guardianship. The uncle's the one. He's the heavy in the house. He's the big influence in the house. Tennessee got uncle on board. Aunt was more interested in Florida State. Marvin wanted Tennessee. Good play by Tennessee to know who the person you have to have the relationship with. Who's the most important one? You got to know that. You got to also know what the kid's looking for.
Okay, so who was that person for Reginald Perry, defensive end out of Florence, Alabama?
Well, for Reginald,
Fairfield, Alabama.
Yeah, he's a young man that just fell in love with Tennessee on an unofficial visit for the UAB game. He came back a couple weeks later, officially visited for the Vanderbilt game. But he told me that he knew when he was there for the UAB game, and the coaches' wives and all the players were talking to him, and it just felt like a family. That's when he knew. And he's a guy that, as Jeremy said earlier today during his press conference, they played him everywhere. He played at wide receiver, he played at tight end, he played at offensive tackle, he played at defensive tackle, defensive end. He was at 245 a year ago, Mark. He now weighs 301.
Yeah, I was going to say he's listed about 50 burgers less than what we have him listed on here. He's a big old boy, and Tennessee, I think, sees him just as that, a big old boy. And let's find out where to play him. I mean, that he's going to start his career at defensive tackle, but there are some that believe that he has legitimate NFL skills with his 35-inch arm as an offensive tackle. So we'll see.
I can tell you, Jim Chaney likes that a lot. I think outside of Jimmy Holliday, maybe from a skill set, this is maybe the most intriguing guy that Tennessee signed today. Okay. Just because he's a big athletic body who can move. He's really raw in terms of learning to play and what to do. But this is, again, credit to Tennessee. Had him in camp, sort of liked him, wasn't real sure, went back and continued the evaluations with senior tape. In the day and age of early signing days, a lot of schools, when they get to August, we've evaluated. We know who we want. We know this is who we're going to go get. Tennessee continues to evaluate all the way through the month of November, and that evaluation was big in getting Perry here.
And they've done a good job. And we'll talk about this. AP's done a really good job detailing this throughout the process, but Tennessee and their staff, I think, did a nice job this cycle of keeping bodies warm when maybe some other targets ended up elsewhere. And so they're not going to get Octavius Oxidine. And Trayvon Ripka ends up at Kentucky. And Jay Hardy, they're still waiting on. But they never lost interest in Reginald Perry. They never stopped recruiting Reginald Perry, so he didn't feel like he was a discounted prospect. And so when Tennessee goes all in the last couple of weeks, he's willing to sign and commit, and that's a big deal in this day and age.
You talk about burger count. I know you want to get bigger everywhere. You want to get bigger and faster. Did they get the burger count right on Amari Thomas at 301?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Okay.
And he's a good-looking 301 out there at Briarcrest in Memphis. And Brent, Mark was asking who the point man was on Amari Thomas. For him, it was his mom. Now, it was mom, it was grandma, it was great-grandma. He's got an 84-year-old great-grandmother. And all those people are influential. He's going to take a pack of 12 down to the U.S. Army game in San Antonio.
In a bus.
And so they're going to roll down there deep. Now, great-grandma did not go. That's why it will not be going. That's why he decided to commit last week to Tennessee. But Tennessee gets him to sign early. Just a great-looking prospect that, you beat out Auburn for, you beat out Texas A&M for. Again, Mark, it's who you're beating out, Amari Thomas. You're beating out a couple of teams that you have to play in the SEC West.
So we got to put this thing in overdrive. By the way, I vote for you to be on that bus, Austin. I'm sure they would enjoy you being there.
Hey, great-grandma loves her some Austin. She does. She's a big fan.
She and Gary Rankin. Harrison Bailey is your quarterback. He comes in at 6'4", 220 after winning a state championship at Marietta this past weekend.
There's 3 guys in the state of Georgia that's produced a lot of really quality quarterbacks in the last 5 years, last decade really, that have thrown for more yards than Harrison Bailey. One of them's a star in the NFL in Deshaun Watson. The other one's going to be probably the #1 pick next year in Trevor Lawrence. And the other guy's won a bunch of games for Georgia the last couple of years in Jake Fromm. So that's the kind of caliber player that Tennessee's getting in Harrison Bailey. I thought Pruitt was pretty complimentary but also honest about Harrison tonight, Hubs, in that, he is not the same player that he was a year ago, which is very much why Jim Chaney wasn't after him really hard a year ago when Jim Chaney was at Georgia. He could not. He's cut his weight. Austin and I went to Marietta. I've been a couple times. We went to Marietta when we filmed Ramel Keaton's commitment video.
He had redwoods for legs.
And he is just night and day different right now. 44 touchdowns this season. He's been kind of the leader of this class, along with a guy like Keyshawn Lawrence. Huge for him to not only stay committed, but he'll be here in the spring.
Yeah, got a lot of toughness about him. If you watch that semifinal game, he got beat around, knocked around quite a bit. Kept plugging away and making plays and leading that team in the state championship game. You're always looking for a quarterback to have some moxie. I think he's got to probably grow in his leadership skills verbally, but I think when you watch him play, particularly the way he's played this year, Austin, he's carried himself with a lot better leadership than he did as a junior. I think that's part of the growth and maturation.
That and the fact that, he does not have an offensive line at Marietta. I mean, you've got B.J. Ojulari, who's a 240-pound defensive end that's going to LSU. He was one of his tackles. I mean, he just doesn't have a very big offensive line, so he's had to learn to get the ball out fast and know where he's going with the football, make quick decisions. And he did that this year to a T. I mean, led them right down to a state title this past weekend.
First time in 50 years.
Yeah, 52 years, almost 9,000 yards, 93 touchdowns, just 20 interceptions in his career. Got a lot of experience. Speed kills. Jimmy Callaway out of Georgia has got some speed.
Well, he's a guy that played quarterback in high school, will play wide receiver at Tennessee. Really, a kid that Tennessee was in on early. Credit to the recruiting staff. They jumped in there with him and got him to commit 6-7 months ago, Jesse. Since then, Auburn offered, Florida offered, Kentucky made a late run, Oklahoma. He stayed true to his commitment, even though there was some flirtation with Kentucky and the thought he may go to Auburn or Florida for a visit. He chose not to do that and signed today.
Yeah, and he was a big need for Tennessee. They couldn't lose Jimmy Callaway because they obviously when you're graduating, Marquez Callaway and Jawan Jennings and Tyler Bird, there's opportunity to be had, whether it's Callaway or a Jalen Hyatt, who we'll talk about here shortly. They needed him to sign today, and they got him to give him that signature.
If Pruitt, as we talked about, wanting to get bigger and faster, gets another top 100 player in a defensive back, Keyshawn Lawrence out of Nashville. Here's a guy 6'1", 200 pounds.
The head football coach, who is a defensive backs coach, is absolutely in love with this guy and the potential that he has. Not ready to play right away. Loves the skill set, loves the instincts that this guy plays with. Big gift for Tennessee.
Yeah, the instincts is something that just stands out to me about Keyshawn. He had 100, or basically it was a 99-yard kick or punt return earlier this year where he took one on a hop that most kids wouldn't have taken and went 99 yards with it. He's going to learn how to play the defensive back position here. What he's done in high school is all instincts, Jesse, but a kid that's got a lot of raw ability, and a guy that Jeremy Pruitt said reminds him of a lot of guys he's coached that are now in the National Football League.
Yeah, I would say of Tennessee's class right here, it's Keyshawn Lawrence and Amari Thomas that if you talk to folks behind the scenes believe have legitimate first-round NFL draft potential.
Offensive line always a key for Tennessee. You keep one kid home from Knoxville Catholic. Cooper Mays measures on paper anyway at 6'3", 272.
Yeah, he's up now to about 285, got to 290 a couple of weeks ago. I think he's trimmed back down a few pounds. But, Cooper's a young man that, could have easily decided not to go to Tennessee because of the backlash from Cade picking Georgia. But he gave Tennessee a shot. Jeremy Pruitt and them made him a focal point from the basically the day after Cade left for Athens, and it paid off because Cooper, who's always loved Tennessee, just looked for a reason to go to Tennessee, and Jeremy Pruitt and them did a wonderful job recruiting.
They always recruited him for Cooper.
Yep.
They always recruited him, not the family, not anything else. They recruited Cooper, and that resonated.
And he's another player that has completely changed, I think, from a junior to a senior. Now, a lot of that came during the summer, his development. Either way, he was really impressive on the camp circuit, banged up a little bit as a senior, but he is a totally different player in terms of not just tenacity, but footwork, technique, and he's obviously up to over 285 pounds. Pruitt said it tonight. He thinks he's a guy that can come in and contribute early. Tennessee needs a center, in the future, depending on what happens with Brandon Kennedy. So Cooper will have an opportunity, whether it's in 20 or 21.
You said great-grandma loves her some Austin. Jeremy Pruitt loves him some linebackers from Memphis. He's got 3 of them. We'll start with the McDonald kid, and they're all about the same. They're all about 6'2", 6'3", about 215, 230, right in that mix.
Bryson Eason's going to go closer to 250. He's eating some burgers, which is okay. That's not a bad thing.
On the burger count.
Well, let's talk McDonald here.
Yeah.
Jeremy called him a guy in the secondary today, and they're obviously going to play him in a number of different spots. Said he could grow into that linebacker role, but a kid that runs extremely well, plays sideline to sideline, and when Jeremy Pruitt saw him play live back during the season, that's when Tennessee ramped up their efforts for that Whitehaven trio, specifically McDonald. That's when he offered McDonald, and McDonald was evolved soon thereafter.
Yeah, and he's kind of the quintessential. If we were playing football 15 years ago, I think he would have been a 4 or 5 star if you had him play as a rover because of just the way the game is. His high school tape is really as good as any high school tape Tennessee has on a lot of these commitments. Impressive athlete, just as impressive. We had a Volquester post it who knows this trio pretty well. What Tamarian has done in the classroom to even be able to put himself in position to play football in college in the last 2 years is a big accomplishment. That gets overlooked a lot of times on signing day, but for these guys to even be eligible and stuff, I think that's a big move for a guy like Tamarian.
All right, now let's move on to Bryson Eason.
Big boy, a Mr. Football finalist. He did not win, could easily have won in Class 6A. They'll play him inside. List him at 230, but he's closer to 250 to 260. He's a big kid, but does not play that big. He plays like a smaller linebacker, moves, and honestly runs sideline to sideline. Aaron Hayden, who I trust his evaluation on just about any kid in the state, said that Eason and Jay Hardy were the top 2 players he saw all year play live in person. I think that speaks volumes because they play some really talented teams out there for Christian Brothers.
Reggie Ragland. That's if you're talking about big linebackers that have played in Pruitt's system, that you're like, that guy looks way too big playing right there. No, he can move laterally. That's who Bryson Eason reminds me of.
All right, and the third one, Martavius French.
French can play, as Jeremy said, all 4 positions. I like him on the outside, though, Jesse. He's a taller version of Eason, not quite as big, and he's honestly trimmed down. He and Eason have kind of went in the opposite directions. He's trimmed down and is much smaller than what he was.
Yeah, I think there was a thought there, even when we went and hung out with them on the spring tour, that he may be a guy that ends up playing with his hand in the dirt almost exclusively. He now actually looks more like a prototypical outside linebacker. He will start at that Jack and Sam spot in Pruitt's defense. And he'll have an opportunity, in the coming years to play because Tennessee is fairly thin at that spot.
There are always positions of need as you go from one year to the next. Obviously, you lose Daniel Batula. You talk about the linebacker position. You talk about wide receiver position, which is up next with the Hyatt kid out of South Carolina, and there are all kinds of holes to fill.
Well, and I think the one thing that he stands out to me, he reminds me of Marquez Callaway from the standpoint he's long, rangy guy who can high point the ball well. I think he's got a vertical threat about him. He's won 4 straight titles. He's been impressive this week at the Shrine Bowl practices, which is a North Carolina, South Carolina all-star game. I like his ball skills, but I think he's a pretty decent route runner for a guy coming out of high school as well.
Well, it's speed, and then there's a longer stride with him. I mean, he's really, really long, and he's a winner. I mean, 51-1-1 in his high school career. I mean, the kid's won 4 state titles over there at Dutch Fork, which is basically Farragut to Knoxville from Columbia there, and just right near the mall. So, I mean, he's just a winner, and his dad and family really fell in love with Tennessee. The kid was originally committed to Virginia Tech. T. Martin did not give up on that one, Jesse, and Tennessee wins out in the end.
They did. I mean, Jalen Hyatt has a really high ceiling, I think, for his future at Tennessee. The Vols were also, frankly, kind of a beneficiary that a team like Clemson has kind of loaded up on so many stars. They didn't have room for a guy like Jaden. And in most other years, I think Clemson would have gone all over a talent like Hyatt. Tennessee is able to take advantage. Not only do they take advantage, they beat out some other teams. Alabama starts sniffing around during the summer. Some other schools. Hyatt stays loyal. As Austin said, the family, especially the mom and dad, sold on the Vols, sold on T. Martin and the plan to use their son.
And he's got a younger brother who could be equally as good, if not better.
The dad says he might be better.
Yeah, and the South Carolina fans, this is the one that bothers them. It really does, because it's so close to Columbia. South Carolina was never a factor. They didn't go down that road, and it bothers South Carolina fans.
Bryce Thompson. The Bryce Thompson connection has a little bit to do with that.
Yep.
Well, the clock struck midnight on some of those coaches for South Carolina. It's ticking on Muschamp. Okay, so the next 2 guys, their weight combined is about 4 of Hyatt. Okay, let's start in Illinois. Let's start with Javonte Spraygun.
Yeah, a kid that came here during a 7-on-7 event, Mark.
Not to play receiver, by the way.
Not to play receiver. He was just here to snap the ball. He wasn't even here to do anything else. Will Friend said, "Hey, wait a minute. Let's work you out. Oh, you can play. You got an offer." Kid committed, tweeted out he was committed, said, "I'm 746% committed." At the time, I'm like, oh, good grief, this kid has no chance to last in this class. He might have tweeted 746%, but he really was. He may have been 748% committed. I mean, he was the most, I guess, less dramatic recruit in this whole deal. And you felt like the whole time somebody's going to make a play on him. But Missouri had their struggles. And I think just wanted to get out of East St. Louis and just fell in love with Tennessee.
Yeah, and I was honestly kind of surprised he didn't actually generate more traction, because he does play at a state championship team. It kind of continues the trend, honestly, Packer, of a lot of guys we've mentioned that come from these winning programs. Spraggins, Hyatt, Bailey, Dominic Bailey, who I contend is probably the most underrated guy in this class.
The 3 Whitehaven kids.
The 3 Whitehaven kids. T. Hodge. There's even, and a year ago you had Crouch, Wanye Morris, Henry To'oTo'o that had all played in state titles.
They know what it takes to win.
They know, and that's what it's going to take to turn around Tennessee, is guys that have learned how to win, that know how to win.
And he's a mauler.
Here's the interesting thing about Spraggins. This was all so out of the blue for his family. When he went to summer camps and started, Alabama offered, started getting offers. His family didn't have any idea what was going on. They didn't get it. He got in a 15-passenger van from St. Louis and did the whole tour with the 7-on-7 team just to get out of St. Louis and hang out.
Yeah.
Comes away with college offers. Visits Tennessee last weekend. First flight for anybody in the family. Doesn't have family members that have gone to college. Here's a school in Tennessee that is going to, said, hey, we're going to get you a degree. His mom and dad all in for Tennessee. The way that they've gone about recruiting him, the fact that a coach came to their house. You have some of these kids who have been on, Harrison Bailey got offers in the 8th grade. He knows all about the recruiting process. This family had no idea what they got themselves into, and I think that's part of the reason why they were loyal. These people were on me first. They believed in me first. I'm good. I trust them, and we're good, and that's exactly how it went.
Kids from championship programs and family vans, the key to this year's signing class. Let's go now to Alabama. James Robinson.
Yeah, James is another mauler guard. Credit Will Friend and just and staff in general. He was here for camp this summer. Worked out a couple of different times for the team or for the staff, and they just kind of loved his tenacity. He always wanted to compete, Jesse. He never wanted to just stand and watch. He always wanted to be in the bull ring, battling the bull, and I think that they loved that about him.
And we were there. We were standing right behind there.
Yeah.
And he went, and probably almost most impressively about James is that he would lose a rep or two, and he'd go right back in there and then beat that, just beat the guy down. And his competitiveness, his tenacity. Clearly, we were there. AP filmed his commitment video. We had all that. Mama loves the Vols. Mama really likes Jeremy Pruitt, and that was key because Auburn, Mississippi State, they tried late to kind of get in there with James. Tennessee, had to make sure that Big James was still solid, and he was, and I think that's because the family was behind him.
Technically, on paper only, you only get 2 running backs in this class. Now, there are athletes and they're linebackers, and who knows where they all move, and we get all that. T. Hodge out of Maryville, a name that we all know well around here. He is a bruiser.
Well, he is a bruiser, and they'll look at him early at that tailback spot to provide short yardage type runs. But I thought T late in the year really was pivotal for that Maryville state championship run. And he missed a good portion of the season because he was injured. But when he was in the game during the playoffs, I thought he had some of those huge runs late in games where he wore down the Oakland defense. Of course, he had the touchdown run that put it away late. And then again in the state title game, he leans on you and he leans on you. And in the fourth quarter, you don't want to tackle a guy like that.
And you know who likes a back like that, don't you?
Jeremy Pruitt.
He likes big running backs. He
Which
does.
goes to Lenneth Whitehead. Both of those guys.
I mean, he's all good with, Eric Gray and the playmakers they have there. But at the end of the day, in the fourth quarter, when the 4-minute offense, Jesse, he wants a hammer to hit it up in there.
Well, I think, and what's also impressive about a guy like T, you're never going to have to worry about him off the field.
Yeah.
Good student, and he is going to find ways to contribute, on special teams. I mean, he's a guy that he will be an asset for the Vols come the future.
All right, there's one guy, there's always the guy that come in kind of as a tandem. For Jabari Small, here's a guy who does not want to be remembered as Amari Thomas's teammate. He wants to be his own guy.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and he'll get that opportunity. I mean, the interesting thing about him is, everybody says, well, he and Omari Thomas, they took Omari Thomas. Those two have played since they were 6 years old. He was heading, by the way, to Ole Miss. So it's not like the SEC had completely ignored him, in my opinion, Jesse. I thought it was interesting to compare today. He's not as heavy or maybe as thick or strong right now, but he does have a little bit of the Eric Gray wiggle about him, in terms of making people miss.
He's another guy that, Michigan was on him this summer. So he has some impressive offers. I think, again, you see a guy's senior film and you change your mind a little bit. Speed was kind of the question mark this summer. He slimmed down, got in the training room a little bit, and he showed some bursts, some renewed kind of explosiveness that was not there as a junior and sophomore. Tennessee likes that. Certainly it helps that he was close with Amari Thomas, but they did not just take Jabari Small to get Amari Thomas. So Jabari will have an opportunity. The fact that Jeremy Pruitt compared him with his wiggle kick return ability to Eric Gray. We saw what Gray was able to do in this regular season finale against Vanderbilt. It's going to be a crowded running back room next season because you're returning everybody. But what that room looks like in 2021 and where Jabari and those guys fit in will be fascinating. Defensive back has been a little bit interesting over the course of the past week. Some commitments going and coming, but Danico Slaughter is another one of those athletic guys, 6 feet, 180 pounds that Pruitt loves.
Well, basically Tennessee, basically just swapped out Mordecai McDaniel for Danico Slaughter. And Danico, Jesse, a young man that really lays the lumber, is instinctive, has good ball skills. You see the lumber right there. I think he just chopped down a redwood. And, he's a guy that Herm Edwards loved at Arizona State, thought they were going to get a steal in Danico Slaughter, but Tennessee and distance from home wins out in the end. And credit to the staff as they continued to evaluate. The recruiting room pushed hard for Danico Slaughter, Jeremy Pruitt, Derek Ansley. They jumped on board with him, during the middle of the senior year, and now Tennessee's got a guy that knows how to hit people and cover people in the back end. Can play the star, can play safety. Scored 4 defensive touchdowns this year. Tennessee did not want to lose Mordecai McDaniel. That stung, but for them to so quickly have an insurance plan and a guy like Danico Slaughter on the all-name team. He is an impact playmaker, proved it as a senior, camped in front of this staff again. That's been a theme the last couple of years with these guys that Tennessee has particularly added late in the signing period. High upside, high floor, good get for the Vols.
Well, yeah, and I think, too, the other thing that jumps out to me, Derek Ansley's coached DBs in the NFL, and at Alabama with a bunch of guys in the NFL. Jeremy Pruitt's done that as well. Herm Edwards knows a few things about defensive backs as well in his time. If those three guys believe he can play,
that's all you need to know.
You feel like you're getting a pretty solid eval when you're talking about those three coaches making a decision there.
Well, let's face it, and Jeremy and Derek, and they love to talk about Minkah Fitzpatrick and all that stuff, but I think as good a story as they have when pertaining to pointing to a guy they coached is Nigel Warrior. Nigel Warrior was nowhere to be found. He was first team All-SEC this past year. I think that's a heck of a story for Derek Ansley, for Jeremy Pruitt to put on their old resume. Look what he was before we got him. Look what he was after we got him. And Danico Slaughter just so happened to talk to Nigel Warrior when he was up here on his visit, and Nigel spoke to that to him.
Jeremy Pruitt will go anywhere to get defensive tackles. He goes into Baltimore, Maryland to get a big one in this kid.
Yeah, and Dominic Bailey, one of the first people to commit in this class, and didn't really visit anywhere. He stayed true to
shut it down.
He shut it down, stayed true to Tennessee, and you're getting a guy that knows how to win, Jesse.
Yeah, I mean, and Jeremy Pruitt joked that you go to Dominic Bailey's St. Francis practices, and it looked like the Pittsburgh Steelers out there because they're so big, it's so well organized. They were the #1 team in the country according to Max Preps for almost the entire season. Again, recurring theme, guy from a championship program. But again, I contend he's probably one of the most, if not the most underrated player in this class. He did not camp at a bunch of places, basically did shut it down after committing to Tennessee, but he is a high floor defensive lineman. Be curious, he's the only one that's coming in early, Austin. Defensive line, obviously Tennessee's returning almost everybody next year. I'm not sure how many guys are really going to be able to get in that rotation, but he's going to have a leg up because he's coming here in the spring, and it would not surprise me at all if he's kind of the quintessential play 4 games, red shirt, and be ready a la Karat Garland or Greg Emerson to be a real standout contributor in 2021.
All right, finally, Will Albright, technically listed as an offensive lineman out of Greenville. This is a guy who's going to be a really good deep snapper.
Yeah, long snapper. And Mark, the one thing Jeremy Pruitt loved him is he's just a football player. I mean, at the end of the day, he can play linebacker, he can play wide receiver for you, he can help you in special teams and more than just snapping. And he's just an athlete. And Jeremy Pruitt loved that about him because, hey, if we're going to put a young man on scholarship, this one can do more than just snap the football. He can help us in other areas, and that's big when you've got an old high school football coach, as he loves to tell everybody himself. High school football coaches, they put players out there in 2 or 3 different positions on a Friday night. Jeremy Pruitt feels like he can do that with a guy like Will Albright, and Albright can help them.
And Will probably attended more Tennessee games the last 2 years than almost any Tennessee commit on this list. He was here about every Saturday.
By the way, back to those 4 and 5 stars, LSU very likely could play for a national championship. 16 4 and 5 star signees by LSU, Tennessee with 13. I'll say it again, you're in there swinging.
Well, you're in there swinging. You hope that your evaluations are right because some of the stars are going to be wrong. They'll ultimately end up being wrong. It's our business, but nobody's batting 100%. The question now is
how many 3s or 4s?
How do you develop?
Yeah.
How do you develop them? And I think that's the encouraging thing for Tennessee fans is they're seeing guys who Jeremy Pruitt, even some guys they took chances on, Garland and people nobody really knew about. You're seeing those guys contribute. You're seeing development out of that. And I think that's why Tennessee fans like this class. They like what this coaching staff is doing because they believe they know how to evaluate and know how to develop players.
Lastly, we've gone long enough and we need to wrap this thing up, but there is another signing day coming, and there is another big name that is out there.
Yeah, that's Jay Hardy. And Jay, in my opinion, providing he does not sign tomorrow or Friday, because there's 2 more days left in the early signing period. Okay. As long as Tennessee gets to the weekend without him signing, that's like him saying, come get me. The open invitation to come get me. I know he tweeted the happy birthday message from Gus Malzahn, yesterday, and he puts all the good stuff out there, for everybody to see on Twitter. But if he wanted to be in that class, he could be in that class. You can send your letter of intent in from a basketball tournament in Florida, and you don't have to be at Macaulay School to send in your letter of intent and sign with Auburn. So if he does not sign in the early signing period, to me that's an open invitation to come get me.
And it just gives Tennessee more time. It gives Tennessee more time to kind of mend fences with the family. The brother did not graduate when he previously attended Tennessee. It gives Tennessee more time to kind of have guys like Cooper Mays and Keyshawn Lawrence and Tyler
those guys
Barron,
are going to lean on him
guys
hard.
that
Amari
Jay
Thomas.
Hardy is close with. Amari Thomas played AAU basketball. Those are 4 guys that are really excited to be Vols. You got to like Tennessee's chances if this goes into January, which it's looking like as we're 48 hours from the end of the early signing period.
And here's the other thing too, about this coaching staff. It's not just Jay Hardy. They will recruit the entire month of January. Most of the focus will be on 2021. But I promise you, they'll kick the tires on some remaining 2020s out there, the transfer market. They will spend the entire month of January recruiting. They're not going to sit back and relax.
They're signing 25.
Yeah, so they got 4 spots left.
4 spots left.
And
All
then
right.
the other one would be D. Beckwith, who is the cousin of Lamonte Turner, who I think Tennessee at this point would be the favorite for.
For Brent Hubbs, for Jesse Simonton, for Austin Price, Tennessee moves into the top 10. Pretty good signing day in 2019, but not done yet.